A man named Shin Halbert was once a hero. The title hero was only given to those who possessed special abilities. When Shin was 10 years old, he decided to pursue his dream of becoming a hero, and within just 1 year, he had succeeded in becoming the hero he had always dreamed of. Shin's rapid progress never stopped. 6 months later, Shin achieved the S-rank title, the highest rank among heroes. However, those times did not last long. After a certain incident, Shin stopped being a hero. Shin carried unbearable disappointment. He was expelled from the hero army group. That afternoon, Shin had just finished his work. He immediately reported to the master, who told him to rest. Shin refused. He still wanted to train more. The master allowed it, saying that after finishing, they would rest briefly. Shin lost his job when he was 15 years old. With a small body and limited knowledge, he spent his days struggling to find work. In the midst of his despair, someone came and extended a helping hand to Shin. That person was none other than his current master. Shin, who had only ever known how to swing a sword because he wanted to be a hero, did not have much knowledge or wisdom about life. 3 years passed quickly since Shin was expelled from the hero army. Shin was very grateful to his master for accepting him. While Shin was working, the master came in again and called for him. Shin thought the master was asking him to rest, so he hurriedly refused. However, Shin's words were cut off when he heard the master say there was a visitor who wanted to see him. Judging by the visitor's appearance, the master guessed that the person was from the hero army group. The visitor was a woman. Shin immediately took off his apron and left the room where he was working. Even though 3 years had passed, Shin still had no good feelings toward that group. He had met countless acquaintances when he was still a hero, and as a note, none of them were women. Just after stepping out the door, someone suddenly bumped into Shin's body and hugged him tightly. The girl murmured that she had finally found Shin. Shin was, of course, surprised by the incident. Shin finally invited the girl inside and served her a cup of tea. The girl called Shin Shi-chan. She calmly drank the tea Shin served. On the girl's clothing was a symbol that was very familiar as the emblem of the hero army group. Shin had also once used that emblem. Shin exhaled heavily. He thought he would never again be involved with heroes. He thought that was for the best. However, the girl who came to see Shin seemed to know who he was. But Shin did not recognize anyone in the hero army group who looked like her. Shin stared intently at the girl, causing her face to flush red. The girl said she did not expect Shin to be working as a blacksmith. She heard that Shin had stopped being a hero, so she was curious about how he was doing. Shin was frozen. How did she know about him? Seeing Shin's cold reaction, the girl pouted. Could it be that Shin also forgot who she was? Shin gasped. Of course, he did not remember her. However, he denied it, saying he could not possibly forget. The girl stood up, trying to remind Shin about herself. Her eyes then welled up with tears, saying that Shin was very cruel. Even after 8 years, the man cruelly forgot the face of his childhood friend. Shin's memory focused on the little girl who wore glasses 8 years ago. That girl often called him Shi-chan. On the day Shin told her that he wanted to become a hero, the girl was shocked and cried. If Shin wanted to be a hero, that meant he would leave the village. The girl asked Shin not to go anywhere, but Shin's resolve was firm, and he left just like that. Finally, Shin remembered the girl in front of him was Leaf. Leaf was happy that Shin remembered her again. Leaf then took out a pair of glasses and put them on. She also tied her hair into 2 ponytails. Now she looked like the little girl from 8 years ago. Shin, seeing her, was shocked, a truly significant change. The girl had changed a lot. No wonder Shin didn't recognize her at first. Not only in appearance, but Leaf seemed like a completely different person, inside and out. However, Leaf was in fact an S-rank hero. Again, Shin was shocked for the umpteenth time, but he did not believe it so easily. Leaf made a pouty face and told the truth. She then took out a necklace that contained her identity as an S-rank hero. The item was made of gold. The existence of that item proved that Leaf was not lying. That day, Shin truly realized it. After 8 years, his once dull childhood friend had now become a highly capable childhood friend. A truly amazing fact. Shin still couldn't believe that Leaf had become a hero and even reached S-rank. If Leaf was a hero, then she must have that item. Of course, Leaf had it, although it took quite some time to obtain. Not everyone could become a hero. Anil. Why those who have awakened the special ability granted by nature, called the Holy Spirit, could earn the title of hero. It was useless if someone did not have that sacred soul, and even if they had it, it was still useless if they couldn't awaken it. That was why there were many things they wanted to do, but only a few could actually do them. Shin looked at the sword Leaf had brought. He asked if she awakened it through a ritual. Isn't that amazing? "Have you reconsidered?" Leaf replied with a bright smile. The sword was called Seiken. Without a special weapon that worked together with the Holy Spirit inside its wielder, Seiken was nothing more than an ordinary sword. Touching the sacred sword and awakening the Holy Spirit sleeping within oneself was the main requirement to become a hero. That was what Leaf had done. Shin was half-dead surprised when he heard a voice from the sword. A sword could talk. According to Leaf, the sword could not only talk but also had a name. Leaf gave her sword a funny name, Violet. The sacred sword could connect with its owner's Holy Spirit to strengthen their body and enhance combat abilities beyond a healer's level. Still, Shin had never heard of a sacred sword that could talk with self-awareness. Did all sacred swords now talk like that? Leaf said not all, and hers was special. Leaf's sword was even female. The sword was made by combining the aura or essence extracted from the fragments of an ancient sword found in ancient ruins, transformed into a sacred weapon. The original sword was said to have been wielded by one of the 12 gods who once ruled the world. Perhaps the original owner's soul resided inside the sword. That was why the sword was a special girl in sword form, but had self-awareness. Shin felt like he was dreaming. At first, everyone was shocked and confused, including Leaf. She was surprised when she first awakened the Holy Spirit. Regarding the sword and the conversation, Shin used to think it would be fun to do something like that. Shin still couldn't believe that such a thing really existed in the real world. Shin kept staring at the sword. Who would have thought the sword would feel embarrassed being stared at so intently by Shin? Shin immediately looked away. Leaf laughed. It seemed the sword and Shin could get along well right away. After the talk about the sword was over, Leaf asked if Shin had other matters to attend to. Shin said he still had work to finish. Leaf became downhearted. There was a place she wanted to show Shin and someone she wanted to introduce. Unfortunately, Shin couldn't leave his work. However, the master suddenly appeared and told Shin to go. It had been a long time since they met as old friends, so the master would handle the rest. Shin wanted to protest, but the master insisted he go to have some fun for a while. In the end, Shin went with Leaf, and he was given 3 days off. Leaf eagerly led the way, shouting at Shin to hurry up, but Shin looked unenthusiastic. Leaf became annoyed, especially since they were already late to depart. Eventually, Leaf forcibly pulled Shin's hand to quicken his steps. Shin wanted to protest, but the girl kept pushing him forward. Shin remembered the times when he was still in the hero army group. After walking into the forest, Leaf walked ahead again. Leaf was happy because Shin was there, just as she had been informed. Shin was curious what information. It turned out Leaf, who was S-rank, used her position and the hero army's information network to find Shin's whereabouts. Such abuse of power. For Leaf, it didn't matter. She had wanted to meet Shin for so long, so she did whatever it took. The girl hadn't changed. She was still as forceful as before. Leaf then said they would go to the hero army headquarters located in the capital. At that moment, trouble still awaited them. Shin was completely unaware. He was silent upon hearing that they were heading to the hero army headquarters. Upon hearing their destination, Shin immediately turned around, canceling his plan to go with Leaf. Seeing this, Leaf grabbed Shin's hand, preventing him from leaving. Honestly, Leaf only knew a little about the state of the hero army when Shin was still a member there. But when Leaf joined, the organization had changed a lot. The hero army that Shin once knew was no longer the same. Shin forcibly pulled his hand away from Leaf's grip. Besides wanting to show that the hero army had changed, there was someone Leaf wanted to introduce to Shin. That person was waiting at the hero army headquarters. Shin got angry. Was that the reason Leaf came looking for him? Leaf immediately denied it, saying that was not the reason at all. Leaf really just wanted to meet Shin, to follow up with him. That was why Leaf had worked so hard to become a hero. Although it was very hard, Leaf truly gave her all. Violet, the sacred sword, testified as well, saying Leaf was not lying. Leaf really worked hard just to be able to meet Shin. Shin was silent for a moment, exhaled slowly, and apologized to Leaf for overreacting earlier. Shin still couldn't believe the hero army had changed. It seemed impossible. Shin's thoughts drifted back to the day when he was still a member of the hero army. That day, in the hero army commander's room, a fierce debate took place. The problem was, what they were going to do that day was completely different from what had been discussed before. Shin certainly did not accept it. They should have evacuated all the villagers before the demons reached the village. The commander threw a paper on the table and said that they must not let the demons realize their plan. Shin still refused. It wasn't too late to start the evacuation. There were still too many villagers left there. Unfortunately, the commander remained arrogant. Everything went according to his plan. They succeeded in obtaining information about the mastermind behind the demon attack. This result was certainly much greater than they expected. Shin said to a hero army member named Liberia that what they were doing now was using the villagers as bait. However, the girl named Liberia remained silent. The commander stood up, asking what was wrong if the villagers were used as bait. What value did the villagers have if they had no power and needed constant protection? The hero army should be grateful because by sacrificing one small village, they could achieve great results. The commander's statement infuriated Shin. How could Gordo, the commander, and the others still call themselves heroes after doing that? Gordo said orders from superiors were absolute, so he hoped Shin wouldn't forget the hero army's code of honor. Shin had to watch his words. Angered, Shin intended to go alone to the village to save the villagers. However, Gordo quickly gave a signal for other hero army members to restrain Shin. Shin was surrounded by 3 friends. Gordo said they could not allow Shin to make a fatal mistake at this time as it could endanger their operation. Because Shin had shown great disrespect to Gordo as the highest commander of the hero army, Gordo immediately expelled Shin from the group. Shin snapped out of his daydream. What exactly did that group still want from him? Did they want him to keep quiet about the incident, even though it had been so long? Leaf slowly approached Shin and grabbed the sleeve of his shirt. Leaf said it was okay if Shin didn't want to go, but Shin had changed his mind. He was curious about who Leaf wanted to introduce to him. Shin then patted the top of Leaf's head. The memory of the massacre in the village still haunted Shin even after 3 years. Shin didn't want anyone else to experience the same thing. At least, he could make sure Leaf wasn't involved in something like that, even though the commander had hidden intentions. Meanwhile, in a prison, someone familiar was locked up with his hands chained. That person was none other than Gordo. The man was waiting for someone. Not long after, echoing footsteps were heard. A man with glasses stood right in front of Gordo's cell, greeted him warmly, and asked if he had made Gordo wait long. Gordo grinned. The person he had been waiting for had finally come. On the way, Shin asked since when the hero army headquarters had been moved to the royal capital. Leaf said the headquarters had been relocated since she joined, which was about 3 years ago. Judging by the timing, that must have been shortly after Shin left the force. Shin felt that Leaf was right. Surely many things had changed since then. He wondered whether everything he remembered was now useless. As far as he knew, heroes, like adventurers, were ranked according to their abilities. There were 4 ranks overall, the highest rank S, then A, B, and C initially. Shin also started at rank C, and from there he rose to rank S in the fastest time in history. Unless the system had changed since then, Leaflet was probably the same. Or maybe the girl had even reached rank S faster than Shin. Shin asked about this, and Leaf said she had joined the hero army about 2 years ago. Shin started to lose some confidence. Then Leaf asked about Shin's holy sword of authority. Shin remembered that he had thrown the sword away. He had asked his master to dispose of it somewhere because he no longer needed it. So, Shin did not know where the sword had gone. Leaf comforted Shin, saying that the holy sword and its user were connected by fate. So if Shin wanted to use it again, Leaf was sure the sword would respond to his call. Shin smiled. No matter what, he did not need that sword anymore. Shin gently patted the top of Leaf's head. He truly hoped he would never have to use that sword again. It had been that way from the beginning. Not long after, they finally arrived in front of a grand-looking building. Shin looked at it in disbelief. Leaf invited Shin inside. Shin had always believed that he would never be involved with that organization again. But who would have thought he would deal with the hero army once more? Shin also could not explain everything to Leaf. He did not know where to start. Seeing Shin silent, Leaf, who had already climbed the stairs, called him while waving. Shin apologized and followed Leaf. Leaf took Shin to the hero army commander's room. Shin was shocked when he saw the commander leading at that time, a girl who was none other than Liberia. They both stared at each other for quite a while, as if reminiscing about the past. Leaf immediately introduced Liberia to Shin, but it seemed the two already knew each other. Liberia chuckled at Shin's surprised face. Many things had happened since then. Liberia apologized to Leaf for asking to bring Shin there. She told Leaf to give them some time to talk alone. Leaf had no objection. Liberia thanked her and made one more request to have Leaf mentor a rank B hero. Leaf raised her hand in salute. With her honor as a rank S hero, she gladly accepted the request. Before leaving the room, Leaf first said goodbye to Shion. Shion said Leaf did not need to worry about him, she should do her duty well. Leaf understood and whispered that if anything happened, Shion could call her immediately. Leaf then left the room. She knew Liberia wanted to talk alone with Shion to discuss the past. Since Shion had such a strong sense of justice that he quit the organization, something must have happened. If possible, Leaf wanted them to tell her everything, but since they had known each other for a long time, there was a lot to discuss. Leaf could only hope that whatever burdened Shion would be eased a little. Meanwhile, inside the room, after Leaf left, Shion immediately asked if Liberia had asked Leaf to leave so she could talk to Shion about the incident back then. Liberia said before discussing it, there were some things she had to apologize to Shion for. She apologized for not being able to protect the villagers. Shion quickly interrupted, saying Liberia was not at fault. The commander's orders were absolute. Even Liberia was no exception. Shion was indeed expelled for disobeying orders, but he heard Liberia was very shaken when she saw the families left behind. Also, Shion had found a new job and was living decently. He was fine, even though he lost the hero title he once cherished. But what made Shion curious was about his expulsion from the force. Even the rank S leader, Leaflet, did not know anything about it. What did all this mean? Liberia said it wasn't just that no one knew, there wasn't even a single record left. At that time, Shion was a prominent figure even among the heroes. He was well liked by lower-ranked heroes, so his expulsion was systematically covered up by Gordo, the commander at that time. Gordo was worried that Shion's expulsion would impact the organization. Shion clenched his fists at the mention of the commander. Gordo always seemed suspicious. As Shion suspected, Gordo was rotten to the core. There must have been wrongdoing that allowed Gordo to become the hero army commander. After Shion was expelled, something unexpected was revealed. Before she could continue explaining, someone burst through the door with a panicked face. The man brought bad news. He approached Liberia and whispered something. A prisoner had escaped from jail. The prisoner was Gordo. Now the man was in the forest with a bespectacled man. The bespectacled man said they didn't need to hurry. It was more comfortable to relax a bit longer in prison. According to Gordo, that was a ridiculous idea. The place was too cramped, and he couldn't stand being there anymore. Everything was going according to plan. Gordo would be angry if the plan didn't work out well. How could the great Gordo and Brant sit idly in prison? Now it was time to give the finishing touch. Upon hearing that someone escaped from prison, Shion immediately asked Liberia about it. Who exactly had escaped? Liberia honestly said that the person who escaped was Gordo. They had just received news that Gordo had fled from the large prison where he was being held. Just as they were talking about him, Gordo suddenly appeared behind Shion with a man wearing glasses. Gordo said the organization was outrageous for throwing away someone who worked hard for the hero army and then putting him in prison. The same had happened to Shion as Gordo deliberately mentioned him. The atmosphere instantly grew tense. According to Gordo, the place had gotten really bad since the last time he was there. Gordo could even get in easily. Was Liberia sure she could handle a situation like this? But there was something else Gordo didn't expect. He didn't expect to see Shion there again. Shion prepared to draw his sword, but unfortunately he forgot he no longer had it. He wasn't carrying the holy sword or any weapon now. The person in front of him was truly Gordo, accompanied by another man Shion recognized. Seeing Shion's cautious stance, Gordo asked the other man to stay calm because he was only stopping by to say thank you. Shion furrowed his brow, his face full of questions. It turned out that Gordo wanted to thank them because thanks to the hero army's incompetence, his preparations went smoothly. Since he and Shion hadn't met for a long time, Gordo willingly explained everything in detail to poor Shion, who had been clueless all this time. However, Shion refused. He already knew Gordo's intentions. Shion knew that all this time, Gordo had been conspiring with hostile outsiders and corrupt nobles within the country to enrich himself. All of that had been exposed by Liberia, which was why Gordo was imprisoned. Gordo smiled. Shion always knew Gordo's behavior was suspicious, but because Shion had no solid proof, he couldn't accuse Gordo back then. Again, Gordo smiled, saying that kicking Shion out was the right decision. But Gordo was curious. Did Shion guess that the person he contacted back then was the devil? Shion immediately fell silent, then looked at Liberia and asked for an explanation. Liberia confirmed Gordo's words. Contrary to the usual role of heroes hunting demons, their leader actually had ties to a clever demon organization. This fact caused massive chaos inside the troops at the time. However, the country and guild decided it would be dangerous if this information got out to the public, so they covered up all of Gordo's involvement. That was also the reason why no records existed about Shin's expulsion. After Liberia's explanation, Gordo clapped casually. Gordo said the hero army organization was very rotten, but that didn't mean he couldn't complain. The organization had been rotten from the start, allowing Gordo to do many things easily: take over the domestic organization, leak information, and eliminate Shin, who was in his way. The country became chaotic and the organization fell apart. Gordo's only mistake was getting caught a little too soon, all thanks to the intelligence of someone who was none other than Liberia. Liberia told the man to be quiet. Did Gordo know how many people had been sacrificed for his selfish desires? Not just the hero army, but the country and its people. "Oh, how scary," Gordo muttered calmly, feeling no guilt at all. That was why the hero army headquarters was moved to the royal capital, all for restructuring the organization that had been destroyed from within by Gordo. The organization only realized it too late, but Gordo thought their work was good enough. Everything went smoothly for Gordo, so that's why he wanted to say thanks. He would soon rage uncontrollably. They could try to stop him, although Gordo doubted that such a weak organization could. It was very amusing for Gordo to see incompetent people struggling without results. Seeing Shin 3 years ago was also very amusing. Gordo even deliberately mentioned the destruction of several villages and settlements, which he considered useless for various reasons. That too was very enjoyable for Gordo. Shin could no longer hold back his emotions. He quickly grabbed Gordo's neck and started choking him. Gordo did not stay silent. One of his hands pressed against Shin's neck. Gordo sneered and warned Shin not to play around with him. They locked eyes until Leaf arrived, swinging her sword toward Gordo's hand that was choking Shin. Leaf said she would not forgive Gordo if he harmed Shin. Leaf turned to Shin and asked about his condition. Shin thanked Leaf for saving him, but why was the girl here? Leaf said she was following her intuition as a woman. Leaf looked back at Gordo, raising her sword. She was truly angry that Gordo tried to do bad things to Shin. Gordo sneered and drew his sword. Leaf and Gordo clashed swords. The clang of steel rang out and their battle continued. Their movements were so fast that Shin was amazed watching. Gordo made a slash, forcing Leaf to dodge immediately. The slash hit the floor and made it collapse. The attack was very dangerous. Shin warned Leaf to be careful. Gordo patted his clothes where the floor cracked. Gordo couldn't believe there were people like Leaf in the hero army. "Now stay down," Leaf shouted fiercely. Shin observed the girl. The little girl who used to always cry and seem weak had grown into a strong woman. Now Shin believed that Leaf was truly an S-ranked fighter. Since he just saw Leaf, Gordo concluded that Leaf was recruited when he was taken to prison. Gordo escaped the prison easily, which made him think that the hero army was full of cowards, but it turned out there was someone with great courage. Liberia, who had been silent until then, stepped forward in front of Leaf. Liberia felt lucky there was still a brilliant young generation, though they were still a bit naive. Liberia chanted the spell Unleash, a holy sword art, fake space. A magic circle surrounded Liberia's body, and shortly after, a sword appeared in her hand. In an instant, Liberia slashed her sword, and without Gordo realizing it, his hand was cut. Leaf was shocked. Liberia pushed herself too hard, but Liberia knew it would be difficult for Leaf to use the holy sword in her current condition. Gordo held his broken arm. Liberia said if Gordo escaped prison, they only needed to capture him and put him back in prison. Liberia thanked Gordo for bothering to come to the headquarters himself. Gordo ignored her, crouched, and picked up his severed hand lying on the floor. Gordo's arrival at headquarters saved the hero army the trouble of searching for him. Liberia stared sharply at the man. Gordo reattached his hand. Shin was shocked to see it. While waiting for his hand to be reconnected, Gordo said he was tired of living in prison. He also hadn't eaten enough while there. Gordo's hand hissed as it reconnected without leaving any marks. Shin was amazed. Was that magic? No, it was not magic at all. Shin felt something unpleasant as Gordo used that power. He sensed something evil. Gordo was glad to see the hero army was tougher than he thought. He promised he would play seriously this time. The aura emitted by Gordo felt thick and dark. Shin, Leaf, and Liberia shuddered. Suddenly, the man with glasses who had been holding Gordo's hand spoke, saying that Gordo had gone too far. Gordo reluctantly stopped his actions. He had given his greetings and thanks, so he thought today was enough. Gordo and his friend left the room. Shion tried to stop the man, but Gordo ignored him. Their business for the day was over. As Gordo passed through the door, a huge explosion erupted, destroying and ravaging part of the headquarters. Gordo stood in the crater made by the blast, ready to leave. But before he left, Gordo gave some information as a thank you for entertaining him. Gordo said he would soon rage. This time, Gordo would enjoy it to the fullest. Gordo and his companion left behind the chaos at the Hero Army headquarters. Liberia exhaled slowly, as if Gordo had saved her the trouble of explaining the current situation in detail. Their situation was indeed dire, but they were short on manpower. That was why Liberia wanted to borrow Shion's strength. Shion was silent for a moment. What could he do? He no longer even had his holy sword. In the end, Shion apologized for not being able to help Liberia. Liberia sighed heavily and apologized for imposing her will. She then changed the subject, talking about Shion now working at the blacksmith's workshop. Shion agreed. Remembering Gordo's earlier statement, Liberia said they had to prepare immediately for the worst-case scenario. For that reason, she wanted to request weapons from Shion as a blacksmith. Without hesitation, Shion accepted. Liberia would greatly appreciate it if Shion could make them soon. Shion understood and said goodbye to return to the workshop. But his steps were stopped by Leaf. Shion turned and approached the girl, then stroked her head. Leaf had truly become a hero. It must have been tough for her. She had worked hard to reach this point. Leaf really gave her all. Shion hugged her, telling Leaf she had done her best. Leaf had become stronger, even more than before. The girl was truly amazing, the childhood friend Shion was so proud of. Shion said goodbye again to return to the workshop, but before leaving, he asked what Leaf's next activity was. Leaf, with nothing else to do, chose to go along with Shion. Before they could leave, a banging sound was heard. A man appeared enthusiastically and immediately hugged Shion tightly. Their old friend had finally returned. The man's name was Hugh. Shion, already feeling suffocated, asked Hugh not to hug him. Hugh released his embrace but now cupped Shion's face and looked closely at him. Hugh had heard there was a robber who entered but was driven away by a great man who was with the commander. So Hugh came to see, but who would have thought that great man was Shion? Shion denied it, saying he did nothing. It was all thanks to Liberia and Leaf. Seeing the closeness between the two, Leaf asked if they knew each other. Of course they did. Shion and Hugh had been co-workers when Shion was still in the Hero Army. Hugh heard Shion had retired as a hero, but now he was back again. Hugh's statement was almost true, but Shion hadn't returned to the Hero Army or anything like that. Shion said he had made a small agreement with Liberia, so for now he would come and go from the Hero Army. Hearing Shion's explanation, Hugh assumed Shion had been informed about the organization's reform. As one of the few remaining members of the previous Hero Army, Hugh was aware of the reform. Despite the current situation, Hugh was glad to meet Shion again like this. Hugh would rely on Shion again in many ways, and so would Shion. The two shook hands. Leaf, watching, blushed. The friendship between the men was warm. Shion and Hugh instantly looked toward her. Hugh, seeing Shion and Leaf, seemed to know Other asked what their relationship was. Leaf quickly said they were childhood friends, born in the same village. Hugh immediately became excited. Of all people, Leaf, the idol of the Hero Army, was Shion's childhood friend. Hugh was very jealous. He then asked if Leaf was Shion's girlfriend. Shion, of course, quickly denied it and said Leaf was not his girlfriend. Hugh told Shion that Leaf was really cute and her body was amazing. Instantly, Shion stared at him and warned that Hugh's words were sexual harassment. That man, Hugh Friedman, was very troublesome and hard to describe in words. During their training days at a morning assembly, Hugh had once said to their superior, "Instructor, please let me squeeze your tie *S." Of course, the man was immediately detained and severely reprimanded. Although handsome, he was disappointing in many ways. After the brief meeting, Shion and Leaf decided to leave. Leaf invited Shion to ask Liberia for permission to go home together. On the way back to the workshop, Leaf brought up the meeting between Hugh and Shion again. She hadn't expected Shion and Hugh to know each other. Shion himself hadn't expected to meet Hugh again, and even Hugh thought Leaf was Shion's girlfriend. To Shion, that seemed rude toward Leaf. Not long after, they arrived at the workshop. Shion greeted the master who was working. The master was surprised Shion came back so quickly. They should have spent longer relaxing outside. The master said that again. Shion then mentioned an important matter, the Hero Army's request for weapons procurement. Hearing that, the master asked Shion to check the warehouse. Shion immediately obeyed. Leaf was asked to wait a moment. The creaking sound of a door opening was heard. Shion coughed from dust. The place was still as dirty as usual. Just upon entering, Shion's gaze fell on a glowing wooden box. Curious, Shin approached it, but suddenly his heartbeat quickened. He held his chest, gasping. This feeling was very familiar to Shin. Finally, he opened the box. Inside was something wrapped in cloth that emitted light. It was a holy sword. The sword then stood upright and floated in front of Shin. The sword greeted Shin, saying it had been a long time since they met and that Shin had become much stronger. Still surprised, Shin asked what the sword meant by long time. It wasn't that Shin didn't know talking swords, but he didn't remember ever knowing the sword before him. The sword understood. It turned out there were other swords besides itself that had ego. Very interesting. Considering its appearance had changed a lot since that time, it was natural Shin's impression was different. Soon after, Leaf arrived with a worried look, sensing a strange aura. Leaf told Shin to retreat. Whatever it was, villains, wild beasts, or ghosts, she would protect him. Shin held Leaf's arm, who stood in front of him. Happy she came immediately, but said they needed to calm down first. Shin's sword spoke again, saying Leaf was quite enthusiastic. Leaf turned sharply to the voice's source and was shocked to learn it came from a holy sword. Shin thanked Leaf for protecting him. He began to understand the tight feeling in his chest earlier. Shin rubbed the back of his neck and sighed heavily, even though he had told the master to get rid of it. Hearing Shin's words, Leaf stared sharply at the holy sword. It was the holy sword awakened by Shin's holy spirit, so it was Shin's holy sword. The master hadn't discarded the sword. Not only that, but the master had cared for it. Thanks to the master, the sword was still there now. Indeed, the master had extraordinary skills as a blacksmith. The holy sword didn't expect the master to use holy water from the spirit lake to care for it. Shin was truly surprised by this fact. The spirit lake was located in a region called the Spirit Forest, north of the kingdom's capital. There, holy water could give unique powers to various objects. The magical ampule embedded in the holy sword was made from a mixture of that holy water and special dragon blood. However, handling it was very difficult. Even master craftsmen would struggle. Depending on how it was used, holy water could turn into ordinary water or damage objects. Based on information from Shin's holy sword, the master had used a lot of holy water and cared for it very well. That was why the sword's appearance had changed. Shin knew his master was great but didn't expect him to be this skilled. As Shin suspected, instead of discarding it, the master had perfected the sword. Leaf, hearing this, was happy and hugged Shin with teary eyes. It was truly wonderful, and Leaf was very happy. The sword was pleased to see the two get along, but a great disaster was about to befall the kingdom's capital. Shin and Leaf fell silent upon hearing this. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Hugh was fighting alongside several troops. Hugh warned his comrades not to let their guard down. The monsters seemed endless. No matter how many Hugh killed, more kept coming. Meanwhile, Gordo and his companion watched from afar. They had successfully broken Hugh's troop formation quite well. The bespectacled man praised Gordo's incredible power and was sure Galusha-sama would be pleased to hear it. Gordo promised to personally eliminate anyone threatening the demon territory. He asked his companion to deliver this message to a scoundrel named Falshia and 3 others. The bespectacled man chuckled. Gordo always hated those people. As an outsider, the man enjoyed the show. The bespectacled man named Belmont offended Gordo with his words. Was Belmont insulting him? Belmont denied it, saying he was only stating his honest impression. Regardless, the hero's troops were gaining momentum. From a black circle, they could see Hugh and the others. It seemed low-class monsters couldn't match them. Surely there was an S-rank hero among them, and that was Hugh. So far, they hadn't seen the commander. According to Gordo, Liberia was probably planning the next move inside the castle as usual. The girl's cowardice hadn't changed since before. Gordo warned Belmont not to interfere without reason. Belmont understood and continued staring at the black circle in front of him. Hugh looked troubled on his own. Belmont asked what they should do now. Gordo smiled and said he would personally exterminate Hugh, including the commander, Liberia.